those of you who've done eating, enjoy your meal. For those who are still eating, enjoying your meal. But we will get back to our agenda in a couple of minutes. But also, I know of a few of you who may not or who will not be with us tomorrow, and so please check in with Zoe as well to get a copy of Catherine's book. You will find that to be a very great resource. In addition to that, and she can speak to that herself. In addition to that, there is a workbook that comes along with that. Is it just exclusively online, right? Right, and that is for free. And like I always say, if it's free, it's for me. So some of you may be like that. So you're going to have a copy of the book, a gift from NABF, and the free resource online. I'm hoping that by now you're into the spirit of why we have gathered. We've gathered as a community to listen to each other, to learn from each other, and to go out together and serve through this network called NABF. So I hope that our remaining time today, and for those of us that will gather again tomorrow, that we are all impressed upon the importance of us doing things together, and to quote Denton Lott and to reiterate Elijah Brown, we belong together because we belong to Christ. And so that is why we come together, and that's who we are.
Here, are we missing anybody? We're all good? Okay. All right. This is what we're going to do. We're going to stand up, and we're going to mix around, and you want to mix with as many people as you can, but you want to share. This is what you're going to share with each other. Share what you had to do to get here, all the things you had to do to get here. Okay. And just mix around. You don't have to stay with don't stay with one person, but move around, sharing what it took to get here, to get Washington, D.C. Yeah. To this event, to this meeting. Okay. But you react to what's printed on the other person's forehead. Okay, you have something on your forehead, and let's say, well, I'm talking about what I'm going to be doing to get here, and you might react to it. So, for instance, if I have on my forehead that I am sad, it says on my forehead, then you're going to react to me like I am sad. But you're going to talk to me about getting here, but you're going to say, are you okay? Why is your face, you see what I'm getting at? So you react to the person, well, whatever is written on their forehead, but you just share your story of how you got here. Okay. Well, let's get up and let's do that. Let's stand up. Don't sit around. Come on, stand up and move. Move around. Okay. Did anybody guess what was on there? You could take it off. You what now? Did you guess what was on your forehead? You have no idea. Okay. You can take off your label and see what was on it. How many people here guess right? Who guessed right? Okay. And you're close enough. Okay. Okay. So how did you guess right? They asked the right questions. Okay. How about anybody else? How did you know what you got on your forehead if you guessed right? Any other reactions for people? Were you surprised at what you got on your forehead? Okay. Okay.
Everybody was asking me if I had a house.
And what was yours? What was your label?
Homeless.
Homeless. Okay. And then who else? Were you surprised at what you got? Or any other reactions from people?
Figure out what to call it. I wear my pants halfway down.
Person, I wore my pants halfway down. Okay. Who else? Any other reactions? His is, I work for the IRS. And how did you know? Did you guess yours right?
No, but everybody was talking about April, and I'm gonna be real busy in April.
Okay.
I'm being audited or something.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other reactions from people?
I got it right. I figured that it had something to do with my hair because they were telling me when you're driving down, people were looking at you strangely. I have green hair.
Okay. I have green hair. Okay. Anybody else? Any other reactions? Well, the idea of this exercise is that it's a way of getting at stereotyping and bias. I mean, some of them have what was it? I say, like, who did anybody here have the 2-year-old? I'm the 2-year-old. No, okay. There's certain bias and stereotyping, and that's the initial reaction, right? When you don't know somebody, you looked at somebody on face value, you just see them, and you already have some prejudgment or bias of who they are, and you react to them that way, even though you're not intentional about it. But in your way you move, the way you ask questions, the looks that you give the other person, share or show the bias that you have. And so the idea of this exercise, you can do this in church, it's fun. And it's a great activity right after lunch to get you moving. And just to help people understand that we all have biases, but we just need to be aware of them. So one of the questions we have, I think we can go on to the next one, is what happens when we face bias? What happens? What are the things that goes on in our mind? And we have a conscious choice. And I think in your handout, this is called the process of adjustment. If you want to turn to that page, I don't know what page that is. It's right after the iceberg. You find the process of adjustment. We have a choice to make when we expect others to be like us, but they aren't. Okay, we have a choice to make, and we get an iceberg moment where we're kind of confused about how either people are reacting to us, or maybe even conscious of how we are responding to other people. But there's a reaction that happens, and it causes us, like we said earlier, anger, fear, confusion, and all the other things. And it's very simple. We have a choice point. We could either say, I don't like this, I don't want to be part of this, I'm uncomfortable, and I'm leaving. I'm not going to engage in this relationship. So you react negatively. Whether you could be reacting negatively in a proactive way, like attacking, defending, arguing, judging that person, or you can just withdraw. Okay, and that's cultural too. In some cultures, like I'm Asian, so in the Asian culture, harmony is really important. So you won't have people in your church who may be fighting each other or disagreeing. They would not fight openly. They would withdraw, or they would do some other subversive ways of dealing with the conflict. But on the other hand, you can choose that you want to keep this relationship. And so you become aware of your reaction, then initial reaction starts to subside a little bit. So if your anger, your frustration, and so forth, it starts to subside a little bit as you realize and are conscious of your reaction and what's going on. And then you try to get more information about what happened. And then hopefully you then have more culturally appropriate expectations. Okay. So in other words, this is just a simple version of what's on your paper, but basically all it is to have cultural humility. that we don't always know what's happening or about other cultures. We don't always have all the answers, and that's okay. But if you really want to pursue the relationship, you'll make a choice to say, yes, I'm going to go through this. I'm going to find out more. I'm going to find out why they reacted to me that way or why I'm reacting to them that way. So it's a conscious choice. We're going to go through another tool, and it's called DIE. If you turn to the next page, DIE, die. Okay. This is a tool that we use a lot, and it's like iceberg. Iceberg is one tool. This is another one to get at cultural conflict or iceberg moments. Die is basically is an incident happens. You describe that incident, but our first reaction is DAE, which means that our first reaction is we're going to make assumptions. We're going to make assumptions like we did with the labels on your head. We're going to make assumptions about that person based on the label they have on their head. We're going to make assumptions based on our first impressions or first initial gut reaction to the incident. And so when we do have those assumptions, then we think of it, then we decide what is going on. We make a judgment about what's going on. So that's our first evaluation. So DIE says, wait, before you act on your first, on your assumptions and your first evaluation of the situation, go back to the incident that you first observed, what was above the waterline. Look at that first incident or what you observed, what you saw, what you heard, and then investigate the I. Okay, so you investigate and say, what's going on? What's really happening? Now, how do you investigate? There's a number of ways. I mean, whatever resources you can get, you investigate. So it may be to get a more description of the incident. Maybe you didn't see everything. How many people have been in accidents and you had 2 or 3 witnesses and everybody all said something different? But I saw a green car. No, I saw a blue car. So, we see things differently. So really try to get at the facts. What did you actually see or hear or observe, and not what you think you see, heard, or observe. Another one is to actually use the iceberg and design the incident and say, okay, what was above the waterline? What might be happening underneath? You don't know for sure, but what might be happening underneath? Another area would be to, of course, have self-awareness. Asking why am I feeling this way, and what are some different assumptions and interpretations of why. A good one to cultivate is what we call a bridge person. This is someone who understands the other culture as well as your culture. If you can find those people, they are your best friends. They're valuable. And those of you who go to a lot of different countries know that. I mean, like what we heard on the video, how do you, when you go to all these different language speaking congregations, do you have someone to go with you to these congregations, or an interpreter, or do you have people in the church that can be your interpreter? These are called bridge people, not just language, but people who understand the culture. And these are people that, if you are working on relating with someone from a different culture, it's to find those people and build a relationship with them so they can tell you, okay, well, what you just happened isn't what you think happened. This is what's going on. And we're going to have an exercise to do that in a minute. And then any other information you can get, like resource books, the internet, the media, as much as you can see. In the workbook, we have actually a section in there that has media resources and books, not in the book itself, but in the workbook that's online. So that could be helpful as you deal with different cultures. So DIE, our initial reaction is DAE, but we're going to go into DIE. So one of the things we're going to do now is I need 2 people who will volunteer, and we're going to experiment with DIE. But I need 2 people to come up here to read a role play. And as we read the role play, keep in mind DIE. And as you do that, think about what you saw or heard, observed, what your initial gut reaction is, and what you can investigate and may be able to find out what's going on. And we're going to have a group discussion on that. So can I have 2 volunteers? And it's in your book, but I don't want you to read the back page of that. Okay, it's called Saturday Event, but I don't want you to read the back of Saturday Event because that explains it, okay? So don't do that until after we do the DIE tool. So 2 volunteers who like to be up here. Okay, another volunteer. Okay, we have 2 volunteers. Hey, let's give them a hand. Okay, we're gonna do Saturday Event, and you just have to read it really. What do you want to be, Pastor Jim or Mrs. Wong? Mrs. Wong. You're Pastor Jim. Okay, why don't you go ahead and read Saturday Event.
It looks like we're going to need help to host the denominational leaders at their meeting on Saturday.
I see.
Can you come in on Saturday?
Yes, I think so.
That'll be a great help.
Yes. Saturday is a special day. Did you know?
How do you mean?
It's my son's birthday.
Nice. I hope you all enjoy it very much.
Thank you. I appreciate your understanding.
Okay. So don't turn the page, but on your table, around your table, if you can do DIE, describe what you just heard, and what do you think? What is your assumption? What's your evaluation of what happened? And then we're gonna go back and then talk about, then go back and go do DIE and find out and talk about how you can find out what really is going on and what's going to happen between Pastor Jim and Mrs. Wong. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, go ahead. Okay, so after you've done the assumptions, then go back to the situation. Don't interpret it, but try to really go at what actually happened. And then how would you investigate this? How would you find out what's going on, the possibilities? And if you have someone in your group from the same cultural groups as Mrs. Wong, or Pastor Jim, you could share what their insights are. And if you don't have that on your table, how much you cultivate someone like that, like at home, when you go back home. Right. We're assuming that Mrs. Wong is from an Asian culture, and and Pastor Jim is from a non-Asian culture. It depends on you can have different perspectives. So if you want to go from a white Western perspective or African American perspective or Brazilian perspective, please add that in, because I think that's some insights that we might have too. Because we're talking about a lot of different cultures, right? And like Quebec is one of those, right? Just assume that Jim is not from the same culture as Mrs. Wong, okay? Let's hear from the different groups. First of all, what assumptions you thought that you discussed on your table? What are some of the things that you assume was happening, and or some of your initial thoughts about what was happening. So we'll start with this table here. Okay, I'll pass the mic.
Oh, you're really giving it to me. Okay. We kind of got stuck because we were debating on the conclusion of this conversation. Some of us thought that Pastor Jim felt that Mrs. Wong was not available when she shared about the birthday party. And then some of us thought that he did hear, and maybe she's going to multitask and try to come to take care of the birthday party with her son and then come to the event with Pastor Jim. We did have some contextual conversations about Mrs. Wong and possibly her background.
Given the last name Wong, we presume she was Asian, Chinese, and so was trying to tell the pastor in a very nice and polite way that she was already engaged.
Right. Okay. Okay, one was male, one was female. Okay.
um we had so many assumptions going on around the conversation that we didn't get real far. Yeah. And one of those assumptions is that I'm going to speak and say the truth. So a lot of misunderstanding, even wondering whether the arrangement between Pastor Jim and Mrs. Wong is an employment arrangement, or is it a volunteer, or is it friendly? So that just all those types of different background things that inform where that conversation, how it got started, and how we wondered how fun it would be for everybody to write Pastor Jim's next response right there at the very end, because there's just so many assumptions that can be made that then dictate or help you understand whether even the conversation is appropriate.
That's a very good question.
Listen again. So, yeah, we assumed that she wasn't going to show up at all. She was going to the birthday party, but we were looking at different cultures that could have been a different answer. She could have showed up. If they'd set a time, she would have showed up with the whole family and have the birthday party at the church. Hey, he understood. Thank you for your understanding. We'll have the whole team come in there, open up the pantry. We're going to have a great time. So we had an interesting, also we was thinking that a bridge person could have been helpful, in that conversation to help the difference in the languages. That was the other thing we were discussing. And and I think at the end we're going to pray for that pastor.
Really, our conversation was a lot like what we've heard elsewhere. We did have a conversation about the likelihood that Mrs. Wong might be from a culture where she might struggle to say no. That yes might not mean yes. And we also talked some about, it was obvious the pastor was missing all kinds of clues about what she really wanted to do. And might have even been struggling with saying, if it was an employment relationship, because I wasn't sure about that either. Sometimes we can be hesitant to say, no, we just need you to come. And so if he's being hesitant to communicate what he really wants, trying to make it her decision, and she's from a culture where yes might mean no, that could produce the impasse.
Wow, that's great assumptions. What it illustrates is that we don't know often, right? When a real incident happens, We can make all kinds of assumptions, but we really don't know until we do the other part, which is the DIE. Okay. Did anybody come up with ideas of how to investigate this and how to find out what's going on? Any ideas from any of the groups? Any of you come up with ideas of how to bridge person? Okay, yeah, that's a big one. Okay. Any other ways? Did you have one on this table here? No? Yes. No? No. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I wonder sometimes we don't realize when people are presuming English is not her first language, how much of the nuance of what is being asked often is lost on the person who, if it's not your native language, it's hard for you to understand certain idioms, ways of speech that are colloquial. And so that could be a possibility as well. So having someone who's a translator speak to her in her language might be helpful.
That's a good point. Language, and that makes it even more difficult, right? More complex if you do language too. Let's turn to the back page, and if someone could read out loud what's on the back page, get a volunteer.
What's happening here? In some cultures, it's impolite to say no directly to someone, especially someone who has some authority, such as a supervisor, a teacher, or a pastor. It would mean disrespect to that person. When Mrs. Wong said, "Yes, I think so," she's assuming that Pastor Jim understands the "I think so" to mean no. If Pastor Jim was of the same culture, he would understand she meant no. However, Pastor Jim misses the message. He assumes a yes is a yes, even if there are other qualifying words following the yes. So Mrs. Wong has been placed in an awkward position of having to say no again to Pastor Jim. This time she mentions that Saturday is a special day, her son's birthday. People within Mrs. Wong's culture would understand that special days are special days. In other words, it is a day of visitors or guests, usually requiring much preparation. This means Mrs. Wong will be very busy and won't have time to help Pastor Jim. Mrs. Wong assumes Pastor Jim understands this and leaves this meeting with Pastor Jim, thinking Pastor Jim has heard her no. However, it is questionable whether or not Pastor Jim indeed heard her no.
So that is that is one of the dialogues that's in the workbook. So until you really dig into it and investigate, you really don't know what's going on. But what here is a cultural difference. You have Mrs. Wong, who comes from who uses indirect communication, and then you have Pastor Jim, we're assuming is from a Western culture, who comes from a direct communication style. Why do you think there's indirect communication and a direct communication style? Why is there a difference between the two cultures there? I'm just using Western and Eastern culture in generalizations. What do you think? Any ideas why? It was different, right? Mission of respect and honor. Okay.
In the indirect communication, you don't want like to bring a disharmony to the group, so you just kind of like wants the group to have a good harmony, but like in the direct, that's okay because you're talking to the individual.
So one idea could be preserve harmony, so you don't want. Okay. Any other ideas of why there's a difference between indirect cultures, indirect communication cultures, and direct communication cultures?
Get something done, meet a requirement or get the activity completed is probably more important than there being a harmonious relationship in getting it done. Let's get it done. We can be happy later.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd often think about sort of these latent threads of domination that exist in some cultures. And so, some direct communication is actually more dominating than it is receptive. So you hear what you want to hear versus actually paying attention to nuance. I think it may be a product of like histories of domination.
Interesting. I think a lot of that is true. Well, okay. Well, one a big one too that may have thought of or haven't thought of is the communities. In indirect Asian, I'm using Asian culture or Eastern culture, it is, of course, it's changing. Everything is changing, but it is more monolithic. So you don't have to explain yourself. I mean, if you think about your own church, and if you're from a church that has mostly majority of one particular culture, you don't always have to be direct. You just know what the culture is like. You know what you're supposed to do. You know how to speak to one another. You know when people say certain things that you know what it means. When you're in a culture that is more mixed, you have to be direct because you don't have an understanding of each other. So in this country, United States, is so mixed that in most cases you have to be direct with each other, otherwise you can't understand each other. But if you go to Japan or you go to China or something, the culture is so in a sense really more monolithic. You don't have to explain anything because you don't have the diversity of different ethnicities and as much as you have in countries like Canada or United States, where you have so many people from so many different countries or ancestries from different countries that to communicate with each other, you can't do indirect communication. So that's another issue for us in this country and in Canada, because we have such diversity. Whereas if you have other countries that may not be as diverse, and it might be true, I don't know if I think France is very diverse. It's becoming a lot of countries are becoming more diverse, which means that there's going to be a lot more conflict or misunderstanding because the communication styles are going to be different. And so for us, that's what's happening here. Is Mrs. Wong is coming from a culture that she's used to. Probably we're probably talking about a more of an immigrant, where she comes from a place where everything is understood. You don't have to say it. We all know what you mean when you say, oh, okay, yeah. It's like what you said. In some cultures, when they said they'll bring the whole family over to have the party at the church. I had that happen with my son. I'm very Americanized because I was born here. My mother was born here. And so when my son was about 8 years old, we had a big birthday party for him. And we just invited the kids in his class. But all the immigrant families, especially from Asia, the whole family came. So their 5, 6 brothers and sisters came, and the mother and father and grandparents came to the birthday party. And we didn't expect that. So we had to hurry up and buy more food and all this stuff. But that's the culture. That is the culture, right? Uh-huh.
Well, I think this exercise is great, but I want us to begin to think how we can adapt this sense of understanding culture within the thriving American church. Because in the thriving American church, there's a clash of cultures that has nothing to do with ethnicity. All right, there's a clash of culture between our more mature sons and my children. They're all Americans, but they're speaking 2 different languages and they're forming 2 different cultures. So I think it's important that if the church must thrive, we can use this concept of understanding language through cultures within our American churches, because one of the wars that we are fighting right now is how to create that inclusive community that embrace both, the mature understanding of the church and the upcoming understanding of the church. And I think if we're not careful, we will be talking past each other.
That's a good point. Because yeah, I mean, even in churches that are like all African American, all white, or all Asian, or whatever, there's differences, and there's different cultures, right? Right, and two, I think I'm hoping that these tools, the iceberg and the DIE, you could use in whatever different cultural contexts that you face, your churches face, or your ministry faces, because and then you have, like, I was in an African American church, and they were talking about different cultural differences there between those from Louisiana and those from New England and those from, and in fact, during the fellowship hour, they all split and sat on their own tables. I mean, they didn't mingle with each other because of where they were from, because they had different, so they were from different cultures, so mature Christians in our churches and the younger people, as well as, just it is very complex, but it's very exciting because it's doable. It's doable. I go back to the idea, and I'm going to go into my preaching mode here. Pentecost, everybody's from different parts of the Roman Empire, right? And they all speak different languages, and they're from different cultures, but they were able, through the Spirit, be able to understand each other, right? So that's something that we have to hold on to. Okay, so that was an exercise just to help us to use that tool, and I hope you can use that tool in your ministries. Now we're going to do another one that is going to be a little bit moving again, and I'm trying to figure out how to do this. I think what we're going to do is have everybody line up on the wall back there, and I'm going to be calling out some categories, and this is called the power shuffle. Have anybody done something similar? Yeah, okay, we're going to do something like that. So, okay, what we're going to do, some of you have done this before, but there's a point to my madness here. We're going to do it within an issue. Well, I'll talk to you more about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call out some categories, and if you fit that category, you're going to come over toward me, line up around here, or stand around here, and then then I'll dismiss you, and you go back to where you were. Okay, so we're going to do different categories. If you are a woman, or feel that you're a woman, describe yourself as a woman, come over here. Okay, look at who walked over. Okay. Yeah, isn't that interesting? They outnumber the men. Okay, you can go back. Okay. Okay, if you are 25 years, or okay, let's put it this way. If you are 30 years and under, come over here. Wow. Oh, nobody. If you are 65 years old and older, come over here. Dance over here. See how. Yeah, 65 and older. That's you, huh, Marie? Okay. All right. All right. You see who's here. Okay. No, you can go back now. Okay. If you were raised in a working class home, come over here. In other words, your parents were not college educated, or, well, yeah, that's true. Working class home. Okay, wow. Just look at who came over. Okay. Thank you. You can go back. If you were ever poor or raised with a public assistance home, come over here. Raised poor, or your family was on public assistance, come over here. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Can't walk into you can stay for this one. You can stay for okay. If you were a person of color, come over here. Consider yourself a person of color. Come over here. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Identify yourselves. Yeah. Okay, you see each other. Okay, thank you. If you were an immigrant, come over here. Or are if you are an immigrant. And if you, in other words, you were born in another country, come over here. Yeah. All right, thank you. Okay, if you ever came from a home that had alcohol or drugs, come over here. Addiction, sorry. Addictions, yeah. Yeah. Oh, if you drink it, alcoholism, excuse me. And if you ever grew up in a home that had alcoholism and drug as a problem. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. If you have a hidden or obvious physical disability or suffer from a yeah, illness, come over here. Catastrophic illness. Or you have a physical disability. Huh? Or chronic illness. Come over here. Ooh. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. If you ever wore or are currently still wearing glasses or contacts, come over here. Wow. No. No. Prescription. If you ever have been called fat, come over here. Ever. Yeah, it depends on culture. That's true. That's true.
Is that true?
It's true. You never compliment your kids. You always go, hey, "You're fat. You're okay." Thank you. Yeah. If you ever were raised in a single parent home or are a single parent, come over here. Okay. All right. Thank you. If you're part of an interracial marriage or a relationship, come over here. Interracial, interesting. Okay. If you ever were an adopted or foster child, come over here. Wow. If you live in a rural area, oh yeah. Oh, yeah. They're getting too theological over here. If you live in a rural area, come over here. Currently. Oh, what do you consider your area rural? Come over here. Wow. Well, you define what rural is, okay? Wow. Wow. We're urban people here. Okay. Thank you. If you are left-handed, come over here.
Ian Barak
Yeah.
and Leonardo da Vinci.
Okay. Oh, temporary left hand. Thank you. Temporary left hand. Okay. If you ever been a child, come over here. You're born middle age. Holy cow. Thank you, everyone. You go back to your table. So the reason we did that exercise is to talk about there are times when we have been powerless, and there are times when we have been powerful. And the reason why the last one was, have you ever been a child, was there, is because we all know that children are dependent on the adults and they're powerless, right? So there are moments in all our situations when we have been powerless and felt powerless or marginalized, but there are also moments in our situation where we have some power, and we need to know where those are. And I do this in a cultural context because the incident we had with the role play, Pastor Jim had power to Mrs. Wong, because he was the pastor. And so we need to know what our role is, where we live, the communities that we're part of, the ministries that we are involved with, what our roles is, and where we have the power, where we can become powerless. So we can work with that and decide on how we want to deal with those situations. But I just want to remind us that there are times when we do have more power. As more able people, we have power over those with disabilities. And so much of our world is made for people who are able-bodied. And I laughed earlier about that. It was good that Pat introduced me because we were almost the same height. Because being short was a disability sometimes, especially when I go to hotels and some of the counters, sink counters are high, and have to get in my tippy toe to spit my mouthwash or something. Or pulpits is one of those. But then if you're really tall, some of our basketball players, I mean, think of the disabilities that they have to face going to find a bed that will fit them when they go to hotels and travel and so forth. So able people have power over disabled people, right, in this world. Right-handed people have power over left-handed people. People who speak English in this country and most of Canada probably have more power over those who don't speak English as well, and limited. So be aware of the power you have in what you do, as well as when you don't have it. Okay, that was just the point of that one. Okay, now we're going to go into alliance building. And on your paper, because one of the things we heard today and about the Baptist Fellowship here is that we're committed to each other in being a beloved community and being an example of a beloved community. And so being aware that how we express our positions in our own local area, but also within the organization, how we express our position, sometimes we have to be very careful, not only cross-culturally, but also with our power. So that's something to be aware of. For instance, in the discussion around the table, I don't know if it happened here, but in other times when we led the training, we noticed that certain groups of people hardly said a word, and certain groups dominate. Okay, And the ones that didn't say a word, and Native American or indigenous people or Native Americans or indigenous people are one of them that said, we don't say anything until we're invited. But we here in the United States, we tend to go, shout out our answers and do this and that. And the person, doesn't say anything. We just think they have nothing to say, right? So in that sense, they're powerless, right? So they need to be invited. So you need to say, so and so, would you like to say something? And then they'll say something, and they say something magnificent, really contributes to the whole organization. But they would never have said anything unless they were invited. So those are kind of things that we need to be conscious of in the organization, so that everyone is included. Yeah.
Because I'm French, I tend to be not politically correct. So I'm going to try to frame it in such a way that it works. I just migrated to Quebec. Although I speak French, it's not the same modalities when it comes to power and conversation and so forth. The question I have is, how much should I expect the Quebecois to understand who I am as a French person, and how much actually the weight of the responsibility is me to integrate into the culture when I want to migrate? Understand? Where do you put the responsibility, in a sense? Can I be offended by a Quebecois who doesn't understand the difference between a Quebecois and a French, or should I expect that? And this is actually part of migrating to another country.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one of the things that, I mentioned to you about the Methodists doing that intercultural mixing the pastors and the congregation, that was the exact question from them was, in other words, how do I keep my integrity as a cultural being and my heritage, at the same time minister to a group that's different from me, or now that you're in Canada, ministering to the churches you have, and how do I navigate that? How do I navigate that? And I think one of the things is that you have to come to an understanding of each other. You should be able to keep your identity and who you are and your own cultural heritage, at the same time be culturally humble enough to learn about the people that you're working with, and to understand how to communicate with them and share with them your culture, your background, your identity, and keep your integrity, yet also help them, help you to understand their background. Does that make sense? So in other words, there's a compromise here, in a sense, but you have to work together on that. And it's not an easy thing to do, but you have to be able to talk with each other and to hear each other and learn from each other. So some of the things that you bring from France, it could be so helpful in your ministry in Canada. But also some of the things that have been happening, the heritage, the history, and so forth from the Canadian Baptists could be helpful to you too, in enhancing your ministry. Does that help? I'm not sure if I explained it. Yeah.
Who bears more responsibility if there's a conflict? If I know that, for instance, if I'm asking a question in Québécois and I don't put tu, t'as-tu entendu quelque chose, and my voice doesn't go down, then he feels aggressive. Okay. So it's my responsibility then to think, okay, I need to add the tu in it, and my voice needs to go down to the question, otherwise it's going to be offended, right? So is the person who is moving into the culture has more responsibility when it comes to conflict than the one who is the host? That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, I think so. because you're the one that's going into their lives and their culture, their communities. So you need to be aware of those sensibilities. And as a leader, we have some responsibility because we're leading. We're not one of the members or one of the, we're leading, but we're also teaching. So I think it's our responsibility to be able to lead with integrity, but also to teach the congregation to understand too, because it helps them to become more intercultural too.
I think in those situations, my response has been, I'm going to assume myself, whichever role I'm playing, I'm going to assume the full responsibility and hope that it can be a shared responsibility. Because I think it's a shared responsibility that if you're coming into my culture, I should understand that you might not gather all of the nuances, and I should be forgiving in that regard. But not all communities respond that way. So I'm going to go into the situation assuming I have full responsibility, but hoping the community in which I'm entering has grace and actually responds like a community should. Does that make sense? And I think that's how the church should be, and yet continuously refuses to do.
Exactly. Thank you. Any other?
I appreciated, Dean, when you talked about the grace, because I think pretty strongly that as believers, we ought to be bearers of grace. And so when we offend our sister and brother, and it's not intentional, we ought to find ways to engage in acts of grace, as opposed to responsibility or assuming the person intended the wrong. When I lived in Zambia, I was whistling one day, and one of the people said, "Oh my goodness, what are you whistling for?" I said, "Well, I'm whistling because I'm happy." They said, "Oh no, only people who are selling their bodies whistle." Okay, except that sounds silly, but that was a real gift of grace. And they knew I was not selling my body, but they took it upon themselves to say to me, "You're my sister, Trish. You need to know this isn't acceptable." How do we do that for each other when whatever those things might be? I struggle. I hear your heart, Dean, but I also struggle with the notion of it's my full responsibility. I do think it's a collective responsibility as the people of God, but oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah.
One of the things I have found is that people are afraid they're going to lose their dominance if they don't continue to be aggressive in the way they talk. And secondly, we sometimes say, "Well, they're here, they've got to learn." You talk about teaching. Well, they've got to learn is what we say. And so we can be very offensive just when we want to really engage people together with us.
Okay, any other comments? Those are great thoughts and questions. I think the biggest thing is, the biggest words, 2 words, is cultural humility. And and I think the other word would be trust, is to how to build trust so that the grace is given, right? They trusted you to be and feel comfortable enough to say to you, "Watch out, don't do that." And so I think that's something that is so important in intercultural relationship, is to build trust. And once you do, then you're talking about growing together. And but it is, as a leader, that there is a little bit more of a responsibility. It's not equal responsibility. It is a little bit more responsibility because you're the leader, and you're hoping to help people to grow. And so that's something that to keep in mind. Okay, we're going to move into alliance building, and part of that is thinking of alliance building in the sense of how can we support each other. And the sheet that you have before you is a whole list of ways you can be allies or advocates. Let me explain what a non-target group and a target group. When we did the power shuffle, those who came over to me were the target group. And those were those who had more disadvantages or were underrepresented or were the ones that had less power. And that's what we call the target group. Okay, the non-target groups are those who have more power, who are more on the dominant side of the culture. And so, how do we use our power to become advocates and allies for those who have less power and less ability to speak up or less advantages and so forth? So there are a whole list of them. I just want you to spend some time and circle the ones that you're doing, that you're doing in your work with Christ. And then check off the ones that you say, oh, I've never done that, but I'm interested in doing that now. I like to be doing that. And then we'll just spend a few minutes around the table sharing just a couple, 2 or 3 of those that you want to share with your group. Okay. When you're done reflecting on yourself, you could share with each other a couple of things that you're doing as an ally or what you want to do as an ally. And here's some questions. Be aware of your role and position in different situations. Are you in control? Do you have power over the situation? Or do you lack ability to control or have power over situations? And how might you be an advocate or ally with those having less power? How might we be an advocate for ourselves if we are in the power of having less power? In other words, sometimes we can't even advocate for ourselves. And are there ways that we can do that? And if we can't be advocates for ourselves, how might we seek out assistance with allies? Okay. Just some things to think about. You might also think about how the Baptist Fellowship can be helping or alliance building with concerns that we experience and issues. Okay. Some of your thoughts. I know it's a long list, and I heard some good discussions around the table, some debates about some of these things. What are some of your thoughts as far as what you discussed around your table? We're going to start with back there. Any thoughts that came out of your table back there?
So just making sure, like I said, in our good faith efforts, we're not oppressing people with our need to help. We are not assuming also, some of us were struggling with the word target still, but if you are a member of the target groups, that even in that, recognizing you also have privilege in other spaces and you don't own all, marginalization, and so I think being serious about liberation, that line that was there, means you don't define it for other people. So that was some of it.
Very good. Thank you. How about this table? Please.
One of the things we talked about is that target groups are not homogenous. They're as diverse as we are trying to work with them. And so we can't lump them all in one group. And then we did some discussion about the struggle that many churches in America are having because they do not want to accept a target group or a foreigner or an immigrant. Going back to the problem with Canada and French and Quebecois is that they want everyone to be American. You can keep your culture, but when you're with me, you better be American and you better speak English and none of this other stuff that we're trying to do to help.
Thank you. In this group?
Interesting. So right, right. I am targeted in this context. I'm so targeted in this context. And I believe there is this one question of do not be asked to speak the position of everyone who is the target group. I feel like now I'm carrying the burden of representation for my target group. So one of the things that came up for me that we talked about a bit was related to the third bullet about encourages target person to get rid of internalized oppression. And for me, it caused me to wonder, like, what's happening with my privilege in that context, as somebody who is benefits from male privilege, class privilege, citizenship privilege. You can run those things down. If I am this sense that I need to fix you, or how do I show up with my privilege trying to tell you that what you're actually modeling is internalized oppression at all? I just wonder if that is a helpful use of privilege. And the other piece for that was around if I believe as an ally that targeted people invite allies to the work, that we take our direction from those who are targeted and not give direction, how do I also show up in a way encouraging someone to get rid of, which we problematize as well, internalized oppression, if I've not been invited in that way? Right? So.
Okay. Now, those are good points because all ally work is invitation by the other person. Yeah. This group is very quiet. Okay. Yeah, the whole thing about alliance building was helping to begin thinking about how we can be avenues when invited by a targeted person or target group. Someone said Earth is a targeted group. How can we be invited to be part of work, being with them in what assistance? And we always have to take our clue by the others of what they need from us. And never to oppose ourselves to say, well, I know how to help you or whatever, because that has happened so much in the past, right? And so a good intention people, and especially good Christian people, would say, I know how to help you. Well, I'll pray for you, and and that will take care of everything, right? So so we need to be careful about that. But there are hopefully this exercise is just to help us think about what that could look like if we're asked to be helpful. You know, what are some ways that we can be helpful? There's another sheet that I have, I believe is in the workbook, and I forgot whether it's the book or the workbook. It's called Resistance. And how do we resist being a target? You know, what are some things that we do ourselves to resist being a targeted group, whatever category that is. So, but anyway, this is just to provoke some thinking, and you guys came up with some great comments. Okay.
How do you balance the idea of being an ally and same time remaining prophetic? So I'm taking the example of John chapter 8. You know, Jesus is asked to take position with this woman, and as they explain why she's marginalized because of her lifestyle, you know, he goes down and he writes something on the sand, which we will all ponder until Jesus comes back. The reality is that at the end, he looks at her and said, sin no more. So he's able to be an ally and yet speak truth to her life, saying, look, what you've done is actually creating this marginalization. You need to get out of it. And how do we get confidence back into the prophetic words so that we can call some of the people who have been marginalized because of their lifestyle to say, look, there's a way out, and then staying able to call it the way it is. And in the NIV, it's pretty strong. Jesus says, Go now and live your life of sin. So that's my question. How can you remain in a lie and still be prophetic?
You asked some tough questions. Anybody have an answer for that?
I'm not suicidal enough to suggest an answer, but I'll make some observations. I'm taking a theology class just for fun from someone I really respect, a Reformed scholar. And he said that Bart was asked, what was sin? And he said, ethics. And he said, what was original sin? He said, a PhD in ethics. Now, what the problem with prophetic in the specific sense, it's not a problem, but it's a challenge, is that what we consider our focus for separation from God, turning away from God, varies from year to year, season to season. Our agenda around these issues tends to percolate in very diverse ways. So we're not consistent often. What happens is that when we try to be insightful and accompanying, we inevitably forget how to accompany. And our language and our engagement tends to separate people. And therefore, the hope for reconciliation with Christ becomes more and more fading into the distance because they see us as the interpreter of what they've done or what they are or where they should be. We were talking about the C.S. Lewis quote. I was talking about C.S. Lewis from Great Divorce. She lived for others. You could tell the others by their hunted expression. Now, very often we create in people a fear, a hunted expression. And so I think it's important to be in dialogue and discussion and to clearly delineate things that you quoted scripture, things that can separate us from God, but that we are not the hammer that does it. The Spirit does that. Billy Graham was remarkable that when people came forward, he always used to say they were not conversions, they were inquirers, that the Holy Spirit would do the rest. And I think we are called to plant seeds persistently and prayerfully and not to let go of that prayerfulness. But there are challenges around challenging. Some of us have such different personalities that the way we deliver those things you get the drift. So that's a start. Bart's not the last word, but it's kind of fun.
Any other comments on that? Yeah. Being prophetic isn't always easy, and being and the fine line between what you said, prophetic and judgmental, also is there too. So it's a challenge that we all have as leaders in the church and in ministry. You know, how do we navigate that? And I'll just share one example. I wasn't sure whether I want to share this or not, but in our church, we had a young man who started coming to church. And I know he was not agnostic or atheist, but he started to come to church because he wanted to, he was really struggling to change his gender. And he came into the church wondering where God was and what he should do and all that. And he made the decision actually before coming to church that he was going to change his gender. And when he announced it, because we asked for prayer, and he got up. We didn't know him really well. He just started coming to church. He got up and he said, I need prayer because next week I'm going to Arizona and I'm going to change to a she. And the congregation was shocked. And then, so we prayed for him, right? And so afterwards, some of the members of the church came up to me and said, how can we pray for him? He's going to become a she. You know, isn't that sinful? Isn't that? And I said, he asked for prayer. He asked for prayer. And surgery is very a dangerous thing. And I leave it up to God to judge. But I think that we need to pray for him. And so we did pray for him. And and the people who asked about it were satisfied with that because they said, we're going to leave the church, but we said, no, he asked for prayer. He's seeking God. Right. So that's a tough question, so is it prophetic? Is it, but anyway, sorry, I kind of digressed there. So yeah, this is the lives that we live in today. And as leaders of our churches and our denomination and our ministries, the world is messy. The world is very messy, and culture expands everything. Like we talk, it's not just ethnic culture, but it's all kinds, and the world is that way. And how do we navigate that? We really have to trust the Holy Spirit. We really have to say, God, what do you want me to do in this case? What do you want me to say in this case? Well, how do you want me to relate? And I think the biggest biggest thing I remember so much and I treasure is how Jesus is. And Jesus was full of love and he was full of grace. And sometimes he did things that offended the religious leaders. But his goal was really the love of the people. And so, I try to hold on to that and to say, okay, I may not agree with my fellows, brothers and sisters, but I love them. I love them. And that's what I have to hold on to. So I don't know how else, but that's a good question. I don't know how to answer that one. I'm going to go on and conclude. And I think any other questions that you have, because we're at our closing time. Ooh, we're in closing time. Any last minute questions or I don't know. I think I just want to, I think we kind of went along and answered some questions. So okay. So we're going to go on to the next slide. And the beloved community, we start out what the beloved community is. And I love these graphics about what beloved community is. It starts out with a reality. Then we talk about equality, right? This is equality. But then really it's equity that we're talking about. And ultimately it's a liberation. And I think that's the way to head to the beloved community as we live through our lives in this time, this era, the difficulties and complexities that we face, that to move ourselves personally toward liberation, and as well as the congregations and members that we work with, that we're really talking about liberation. But this is the movement. We want to move from reality to equality, but really equity, so that ultimately is liberation. Okay, so I'll end with that. Okay.
Thank you so much, Katie, for investing in us your time, your wisdom, knowledge, and all of that good stuff. I think we've moved from being contemplative to laughter to engaging and back to being contemplative, because I think at the end of the day, our experience here empowers us to be different, to act different in such an indifferent world. And so I want to thank you for your time and for being with us today.